Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the 250 events in the life of Jesus. And we're studying this for those who are new. We're studying this chronologically. We are going through it in order through the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And, we're just doing 5, 10, 15-minute Devos a day just to kind of dive into a little bit of reading and learning more and diving deeper into Scripture every single day. And so if you're new to us, then I ask that you subscribe to our channel because we're going to continue to put these out every single day. And then we're going to go deeper into some other studies. And if there's anything you'd like to see or questions you have, you're more than welcome to ask those in the comments or reach out to us and ask us. And we'll do videos or do series on those as well as we can get to them. But today we're looking at Jesus sending demons into a herd of pigs. Sometimes it's just called Jesus heals the demon possessed man or two demon possessed men. It depends on what part of the Bible you're looking at. And so this comes from Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So they all three record this part of Jesus's life. And so what's happened is Jesus has arrived on an area on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and two men come out and that are possessed by demons. They come out of the tombs, right? They're hanging out in the tombs, and they're so violent, no one could go through that area. They would be attacked. If anyone tried to go through that area, would be attacked. And so whenever they came up, they began screaming at Jesus. So, why are you interfering with us? And they called him Son of God. Have you come here to torture us before our appointed time? And we'll talk about that in a second. And there happened to be a large herd of pigs feeding in the distance, and the demons begged, "If you cast us out, send us into the herd of pigs." And so Jesus then gave them permission or commanded them to go. And so the demons came out of the men and they entered these pigs, a whole herd, and the herd went crazy and they plunged down the hillside into the lake, and they all drowned in the water. And so the herdsmen, fled to the nearby town. Obviously, I mean, that would have been a crazy thing to witness, telling everyone what had happened to the demon possessed men. And the entire town had came out to meet Jesus, but they begged him to go away. They actually begged him to leave and leave them alone. And so this was kind of the story of the demon possessed man or men, and what Jesus did with sending these demons into the pigs. And again, go back and read. There's Matthew 8, Mark 5, and Luke 8. Find the three recordings of it there, and dive into those a little bit deeper. But we're going to have quite a bit of notes for this one, so we might be in this one for a little while. And so the region they were in was located southeast of the Sea of Galilee. And it's one of the more important cities of the region. And it was part of what was what we called the 10 towns. We talked about it earlier. It was 10 towns in a little area that had grouped together and formed kind of their own community. And they had their own independent governments, and they were largely inhabited by the Gentiles. I mean, obviously Gentiles, because Jewish people would not have been raising pigs. Demon possessed people, right? They are under the control of one or more demons, and we see this in this particular scenario. And so demons, as we study scripture and we see, are fallen angels who joined Satan in his rebellion against God. And again, we don't have a lot of detail about that whole rebellion, but we just know that Satan and his followers were thrown out of heaven, and now they're evil spirits under Satan's control. And although we're not really sure why demon possession occurs, we know that evil spirits can use the human body to destroy and distort a person's relationship with God and likeness to Him. And so we don't understand demon possession. We really don't. And I think those who say they understand it fully or have a grasp on it really don't. There's some people who believe that demon possession doesn't happen today. I personally believe that it can. I don't think it's as active as it was in Jesus's time. I think part of the reason it was so active was because Jesus was there, and I think they were trying to interfere with his ministry. But I'm not going to say that it doesn't happen. There's some people who believe it stopped after that, but I don't necessarily believe that, because I've seen people and I've seen some things. Not like I've talked to people who've seen some what they would truly call demon possession, but again, I'm not going to try to debate this one or go into huge details. I'm not going to discount the power of Satan here on earth and his angels, and so to say, hey, this demon possession can't happen today, I think is kind of dropping your guard down to the seriousness of the darkness of and evil of Satan. So, although we're not sure why it occurs, it takes over the human body and in that possession. This evil spirit said its name was Legion, right? And so a legion was the largest unit of a Roman army, and it consisted of 3,000 to 6,000 soldiers. So this man was possessed by many demons. Now, we don't know how many. Again, it could be 3,000. We don't know, but we know it was a lot. It was more than one. And so they help Satan tempt people to sin, and they have great destructive powers. We see that Matthew says, and this is one of the interesting things. And again, a lot of it has to do with writing styles as well. That Matthew says there were two demon possessed men, while Mark and Luke only refer to one. And a lot of times, especially with Mark and Luke's writing, they only would mention the person that did the talking, right? And that would be common in a lot of the writings in that day. Was whenever they would write about something, usually if there wasn't someone there talking, then they wouldn't write about that person because they didn't talk, whereas Matthew included that. And so some people will try to use this as a, oh, look, there's a contradiction between there one man or two men. More than likely there was or two men, but Matthew and Mark, or Mark and Luke only refer to the one because he's the only one who spoke. And the other thing here is, according to Jewish ceremonial laws, right? The men Jesus encountered were very unclean, and so he shouldn't have had anything to do with them. Really, he should have kept his distance from them. And so, from a Jewish standpoint, Jews would not have done anything with him. So, you got three things: one, these are Gentile people, right? Two, they're demon possessed, right? And so that's another reason to stay away from them. And three, they live in a cemetery, which would have been considered very, very unclean. And so, a Jewish person wouldn't have even spoke to these people, right? But Jesus helped them anyways. Right, they're demon possessed. They have multiple demons, and we're not for sure how many. And so this is a sign that Jesus is showing us that we should not turn our backs on people, right, who we think are unclean or repulsive, right, to us, right. Well, we may not like them. We may think that they're unclean, or they may violate our moral standards or beliefs. But we've got to make sure we got this self-righteous attitude stuff's got to stop. We can't do that. We cannot have a self-righteous attitude when it comes to Jesus, who had the ultimate reason to be able to do that, didn't. So we have no reason to be acting that way. Instead, we need to realize that every human individual is unique, is a unique creation of God, and needing to be, see his love, right? They need to see the love of Christ. We need to make sure that we do this. The Bible tells us at the end, here, that the whole world and his devil are going to be thrown into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur. Revelations 20:10, very figurative. We're not sure 100% what that's going to be like. And I've talked about this before. Is hell going to be, figuratively fire? Is that just a figurative something of something that destroys, or something that's, a figurative language? We don't know. Revelation's very figurative, so I would probably lean towards that. But and so we need to understand this, right? That everyone needs to see our love, the love that Jesus showed these people, because of the fact that what's going to happen in the end. And so, because of some of this, right, the demons know what's going to happen to them in the end. They know. And so we see the demons ask Jesus as he came to them, he come to them and says, asked them if they were going to torture them before God's appointed time. Right? They knew their ultimate fate. They understood their ultimate fate, but they're like, hey, man, Jesus, you're ahead of time here. You're not supposed to be here yet, or you're not supposed to do this yet. And so when the demons entered the pigs, right, they drove the animals into the sea. And this showed that their destructive nature, right? And so why didn't Jesus just destroy them? Right? Why did Jesus allow them to to do this, right, to these animals? Why did he? And it's because it was not the appointed time yet, right? It was not time for that work to be done. Jesus here, you know he had come, but it wasn't his time to send them to the bottomless pit, or like they talk about, or to torture them or destroy them, kind of like what they talk about. And so because that work had not come, he healed many people of the destructive effects of demon possession. He cast out many demons, but he did not destroy any of them. He cast them out, but he did not destroy any of them. He could have, but he didn't, because it's not appointed yet for him to do that. And so he's sticking to that timeline. And so the demons, right, their actions prove their destructive intent. If they could not destroy the men that they had, they were going to destroy these pigs. And so they ran them off a cliff and killed every single one of them. And so this would have been an intense scene. To me, this is one of probably the most, besides the crucifixion and resurrection story, the part of Jesus' ministry. This was probably a very, very intense scene. I can't imagine what this looked like. And so they go and tell the townspeople, and they said, "You need to get out of here. You need to leave," right? And so, why would they ask Jesus to leave? Why would they see all this and be like, "Well, Jesus, you need to get out of here"? Unlike their pagan gods, right? They worship pagan gods. Those could be contained and controlled and appeased, right? They weren't real. They weren't real, and so they were made up, and so they could appease these gods. They saw how powerful that Jesus was, and that he could not. They feared him. They feared his supernatural power. It was something they had never witnessed before, and they were upset. Right? They were mad about losing their herd of pigs. They were mad about losing their livelihood, and so more than they were that these guys had been delivered from demon possession. Right? They valued their pigs more than they did these two men that were saved. So not only were they scared, right? They were, and this is something we've got to make sure we're careful of, right? As Christians or as humans, right? A lot of times in fear, we act in things we don't understand or things we're afraid of. We act out in ways we shouldn't have, and we do this sometimes as Christians, and we do this as the church sometimes. And so the question becomes then: do we become more concerned about properties and programs than we do people? Because a lot of times we do, right? A lot of times we're more worried about our buildings and what goes on in them versus the actual people that are coming. And we need to make sure we don't do that, right? Human beings are created in the image of God and have eternal value. All the stuff that we have is going to be destroyed. Our buildings, our grounds, our everything we put inside of them, all the things that we make important, every single bit of that's going to be destroyed. But the human, the human soul is it has eternal value. And we need to make sure we're more focused on that. And so it's foolish, right? It's very foolish, but it's very easy to value possessions and investments and even animals over human life. And we need to make sure we don't get caught up in that. We don't, right? Again, and I've talked about this in the past. Nothing against having buildings, nothing against having property, nothing against having programs, but we just need to make sure that we don't make the things we do more important than who we're supposed to be doing them for, or who we're supposed to be introducing these people to. And that's very important, right? And so, the question is would you rather have Jesus leave you than finish his work in you? And honestly, the answer for that for a lot of people is yes. They don't want anything to do with Jesus. They want to send him away, and a lot of it could be a fear. I've seen people. There's a fear, right? There's a fear there because some of it's things you don't understand. There's a lot of confusion. There can be things that are very scary, and so it's interesting, how this whole thing plays out. And we just need to make sure that as Christians, we're not the people who are telling Jesus to leave, and we're not trying to value things over animals and buildings and physical things. We need to make sure we put the human soul and the value of the human soul first, right? And so the other thing that's interesting about this story, it's not in Matthew, I think it's in Luke, and I'm sorry I didn't write it in my notes for this one, but Jesus told this man to tell his friends about the healing. This is one of the few times, right? Most of the times, Jesus urged those he healed to be quiet. So what's the difference here? One, Jesus knew the man would be an effective witness to those who had his previous, like, seen him, right? They'd seen what he was doing, right? They'd seen that he lived in a graveyard and was attacking people and was clearly demon possessed, right? And so obviously something miraculous had happened to this guy. And also Jesus wanted to expand his ministry by sending his message into the Gentile area. And three, Jesus knew that the Gentiles, since they were not expecting a Messiah, would not divert his ministry by trying to crown him king, right? Or and in fact, when we see, they asked him to go away. And so, that was the difference, right? He didn't have to worry about the Gentile leaders coming after him, either trying to kill him or trying to turn him into this thing that he was not, or trying to, push his ministry along further than he wanted to go at that time. And so he didn't have to worry about all those things. And so he sent them, he sent this guy and said, hey, you're going to be an effective ministry to the Gentile people. And I clearly believe that that was probably, this seed that was planted here was probably what helped make the apostles' ministry to the Gentiles more successful than what it would have been if this hadn't happened. I mean, there's reasons behind everything that Jesus did, and I'm sure that's one of them. And so, just to sum up this story, and it's long, and I know there's a lot of notes here, and I covered a lot. Honestly, this could have been a 2 or 3 day lesson, but we need to remember that Jesus is all powerful, right? He has full control over the thing. Demon possession, I think we need to be leery of. We need to be leery of anything that can be considered satanic, because and not get that idea that, well, demon possession can't occur today, or that you can be controlled by Satan. You can be controlled by Satan, especially if you allow him in. And so we need to make sure we don't get caught up in that. And then the other thing is that we need to make sure that we continue to value the human soul and people over our properties and our programs and our personal preferences, right? You know, the thing is we need to focus on the mission and not the methods, right? The methods are always going to be changing. We don't need to be tied to those type of things, but we need to make sure that the mission is 100% on, and that we're focused on the mission and we're focused on the people and not the things behind the scenes and how we do things, or customs, or traditions and stuff like that. And so we need to make sure we stay focused on the people. And like this guy, we need to make sure we're continuing to send the message out of Jesus and who he is and how much he can change our lives, and show people who Jesus was, the loving kindness, the acts of kindness, the kind of love that we see that he had, the sympathy he had for these Gentile men who most Jews would have not had anything to do with, or even attempted to try to do anything. We need to make sure we are doing that, right? We are working with those and paying attention to those people that everyone else considers dirty and not worth helping, that we are the ones reaching out to those people and helping them any way we can. Again, I appreciate everyone for watching these videos. I appreciate you for sharing them. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, please go ahead and do so. We're going to continue to put studies out like this and go deeper into some other studies. And as always, I appreciate you for watching.